everybody, and welcome back to the SecTech Podcast. I am your host, Matt, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Kenn Williamson. Kenn, how you doing, man?
Doing really well. You know, been really busy. I know you've been very busy too, so I'm excited to be back. And yeah, everything's going really well. I'm really excited for the guest that we have today. I know him because I consulted with him at one of his previous engagements, and I'm just really excited to talk to him and hear more about what his take on some of these things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to say, for those of you keeping track, this is Kenn's third haircut since we have started this podcast. So if you're noticing, you know, every time we start, you're like, is that Kenn? It is Kenn. Kenn changes up the hairdo, man. I like it. You always keep us guessing. I never know how you're going to show up, Kenn.
Yeah, I'd like to say that this was intentional, but I fell into the trap that all developers fall into when going to meetings, which is just one more issue. I can just knock this out real quick. And then, you know how it is. And then all of a sudden I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to take a shower before here. These guys don't want to smell me. So that's kind of what's happening here. But yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, you know, for anyone, if you got a counter maybe on your whiteboard of you know, keeping track of Kenn's haircuts, we are at 3. And I'm loving it, man. You know, it's gonna be a running part of this podcast, I feel like. And yes, I am so excited for our guest today. Today's episode, we're gonna be talking a lot about the connect between business and technology, digital transformation. And today we've got JD Davis joining us. JD is a full stack engineer. He's a technical architect with a large multinational ERP vendor. He focuses a lot on bringing, bridging that divide between what the business wants and what's technologically feasible, and specializes a lot in automation and scalable infrastructure. It's going to be an amazing, amazing conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, JD Davis. JD, how are you, man?
I'm good. You know, I grew my hair out because I figured I'd be, you know, joined by like-minded folks. I ended up by myself. So
yeah, you know, I keep it short because I wear a lot of hats, and I've got that kind of hair that if I put a hat on for 2 minutes and take it off, it will be messed up the rest of the day, and it'll never fix itself. So I got so tired of it, I just shaved all my hair off.
Yeah, that's why there's a hat today. Is you know, I'm at that awkward phase. I made the mistake of putting this on this morning, and I said I can't fix it, so we're coming in.
No, when JD and I first met, I was going through my you know, long hair, long beard phase. And
the so long hair, don't care phase.
Maybe didn't even recognize me when I came in. He was like, "Who is this man?"
I had the goatee and everything. Yeah, it was. What do you want to call that? The Dark Wizard.
Yeah,
the Dark Wizard. I like it.
That is a pretty apt description of how it looked for sure.
Yeah, if we have any other software engineers, developers, if you want a little side project as you're learning, maybe you're just starting out, what we could really use is a website with just different shots of Kenn and those haircuts, and then like some sort of like gamer profile. You know, like just put him in as the villain or the hero. You know, just depending on how he's coming in of the video games, you know, we can give him some bios, but I like that, the wizard.
I think we can deep fake him as Rasputin in a couple things.
It wouldn't take much, really.
No.
Oh man, I love it. JD, we're so excited to have you. You know, jumping off, this is a question we've asked a couple times with people, a few different guests, but I'd like to re-ask it because I think it's one of the most important questions in business and technology, and I think it's great to have a few different people who are coming in with different backgrounds being able to give different perspective on this, because really one of the things in this podcast that we want to connect is business and technology. And you know, you hear it all the time, technology is just growing, right? The internet is everywhere, we all have smartphones, AI is taking off, you know, there's no lack of expansion when it comes to technology. However, there can still sometimes feel like an apprehension, even in 2023, from the business side to fully embrace what technology can do for your business, right? And that's not true for everybody. Some people have truly embraced it and thrived. But, there still seems to be, for the everyday CEO sitting in his office going, okay, I have to allocate resources. And here, when it comes to allocating resources to technology, there still seems to be a little bit of resistance in the market of, is this really going to help grow my business? What is technology really going to do for me? And so, man, I would love to hear, you have a wealth of different experience, not only from where you worked, people that you've done business with. How are you seeing the divide between business and technology, and what do you see as some of the gaps or the things that we need to continue to do to continue to integrate how businesses see technology today?
I think probably one of the biggest issues that companies face today with their technology team is that they treat them as a different team. They treat them as a separate group. You're on a pedestal. You're siloed away from the rest of the company. And you'll hear it, let's go ask the brainiacs, let's go do this. And, we're developers. Yeah. We know that there are developers across the board with every skill level, every talent. But the general constant for developers is that you can think like a developer. You can take a problem, break it down, and reason about it and assign technological meaning to those problems.
Yeah.
The issue that a lot of businesses have is they don't foster that type of mentality team-wide. They reserve it to the technological team. They're the ones that are handed issues, and they're tasked to break it apart. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not, a teacher. I can work with them and kind of break their issues apart and try to figure out what they're doing. But I'm not a consultant. I don't kind of work through those roles. I'm here to, tell your story in a technological way. And the thing that a lot of teams miss out on is they don't foster teaching that skill to the rest of their team. They're so busy trying to teach the developers how to be a consultant, how to be a doctor, how to be an engineer, that they're not enabling the rest of the team to be effective with their development team. You want your developers to wear the pants of, you need to be a business consultant, you need to be a business analyst, you need to handle all of these, when they're different skill sets. Yeah. They're widely different skill sets. And a lot of folks just don't, from a leadership standpoint or from a outside of technology standpoint, they don't necessarily realize it's a lot easier to teach you to think like a developer than it is for you to teach a developer to be a doctor.
Yeah.
And so that's where the divide tends to be, is a lot of companies don't foster that curiosity. They don't partner your developers with some of the less technical users and try to teach them to do that. They don't self-guide them. They, it's a lot like teaching a new developer how to program. If you've done pair programming, you kind of have a more apprentice-master relationship with them. And I think that a lot of that benefits the rest of the team, the rest of a company as well. Don't walk them through the development process, but walk them through your way of solving a problem. And that's been really, really helpful for me, is to bring in the stakeholders on processes and talk to them and say, hey, what are you trying to do? And I have them explain the issue to me.
Yeah.
And then I try to have them explain it technically.
Yeah.
And everywhere they stumble, I help, much like a teacher, guiding them through it. But by the end of it, they've told me the story. They've told me what they want technologically. And then I can go and work on that.
Yeah.
And you give them a phase one, and you let them kind of play with it, and you learn together. Because you're not basically taking this information, running away and squirreling it away and building something, and 6 months later you say, here you go. And they say, that's not what I wanted at all.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good starting off point. Maybe let's back up a little bit, and you could talk a little bit about what you do. We mentioned that you work on ERPs, and I think you kind of alluded to this. You probably have a number of different businesses using the ERPs in wildly different fields.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about that and the challenges of trying to bridge that gap of all of these different fields using this technology?
Yeah, without turning this into a sales pitch for our ERP, just to kind of give you a high level of what our software can do.
And real quick, too, can you define, just for anybody out there without a technical background, can you define ERP as well?
Yeah, it's an enterprise, I'm probably not even going to get the acronym right, but it's an enterprise resource planning software.
Gotcha.
You're basically able to say, here's my techs, here's my products, here's our jobs, let's put them into a system and coordinate them all. If you've used a Salesforce, you've used Sage 100, any of those things, those are all ERPs. Very similar to CRMs and have a lot of overlap, but more for resource planning than customer outreach. But what our software, the way it's designed to be used, is it can be customized extensively. And I mean extensively, completely rewritten for every customer. Every use case, every little piece of it can be customized. And any of us that have written software, we realize to make something that generic is not an easy task. But the harder side of that is to enforce kind of rigid constraints on something that generic is even harder. And so our software kind of doesn't. It's up to us to work with customers and define what those limits are and to implement them as necessary for those customers. And so what that ends up causing is a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's where these kind of approaches become very, very useful. Is our general approach at the company I work for is we have a business consultant, we have technical architects, we have project managers, and each of these are pretty rigid roles, but there's a lot of overlap. Our business consultants are not programmers by any stretch of the imagination, but we've kind of taught them to think like programmers. Yeah. We say, hey, they'll say, hey, I don't know if this is technologically possible, but they're thinking about it. And that's something that most companies don't. And that's the hardest part, is getting them to think about what's possible. Mm-hmm. So many companies are used to what they're doing. They're happy to use suboptimal software. They're happy to use really bad, broken processes. They're willing to copy and paste stuff from here to here to here to here 5 times over because they don't think of any other way. They don't think of optimizations. They just kind of do. And, my job as a technical architect is to, inspire people. What do you want to do? What do you hate about what you do? Yeah. What do you wish was easier about your job? And it's those things that every single day they go home and they'll tell their husbands and their wives about it. They'll say, hey, I was at work today and I had to do this for 4 hours. Why'd you have to do it for 4 hours? Well, I don't know. It had to be done. Well, ask those questions. Why am I doing this? Because the thing that technology does is it makes your life easier. It can automate and it can make all these things easier for you, but only if you question it. Only if you're willing to take that approach.
Yeah, gotta ask the right questions. I think that's a really good point. Yeah. We were actually talking about that
last episode.
So I think, man, that's really great. And so, it completely plays into what you were saying earlier. It's so much easier for you to train these customers and consultants to try to think a little bit like a developer than it is for you to try to understand the business process of every specific business that you're going to be working with, right?
And that's one of the cool things about our software is they have built in what they're called process flows. Effectively, everything in our software is event-based. And for every event, you can do something and you can run custom queries and you can do this. And it's awesome because as soon as you tell customers, hey, whenever you submit an order, what do you want to happen when you submit that order? Oh, I'd love for this to happen and that to happen. I'd like for this to happen. We don't have to copy this from that system to that system. As soon as you tell them, hey, when this happens, what do you want it to happen? They start to tell you the story they want. They haven't used the software. They haven't been down those paths. They haven't... we like to joke that public education kills creative thinking. It makes us all think together. And that happens with software. You give someone a program and you kind of tell them how they're supposed to use it, and they're probably not going to use it any differently. Yeah. But you give them a piece of software that's maybe a little more ambiguous and not well defined, and they're going to find ways to use it that you didn't quite anticipate.
So good. That's so good.
That's a lot about softwares. You've got to be careful not to rigidly define things, at least things that you're not sure about.
Right.
Because, as I keep saying, we don't do those jobs, and so we're going to make a lot of assumptions. And that's the hard part is we're really bad at making assumptions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you said that. That's so good because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about is, and going back to even what you said in your first answer, it's easier to teach a doctor a little bit about software than to teach a software engineer about being a doctor. And I wonder sometimes as technical guys, people on the technological side, are we in some ways failing to communicate effectively what we do? And what I mean is so a great example is, I was on a site visit not too long ago with a customer, and in the middle of talking a little bit about software, he started complaining about this printer, and he was like, do you know how to fix I mean, literally, do you know how to fix the printer? And I was like, no, but I could see where he was going in his mind. Oh, I've got a tech guy in front of me, right? Maybe he knows how to, and you know what? Maybe I did, but I always wonder too, on the tech side as developers, are we being clear enough about what we do, who we are, what the value we bring, and could we, there's some things that we need to set up, or define a little better so that companies have better expectations of their software teams.
Let me kind of pivot and say, I think the biggest lie that we've sold this industry is that we're white collar workers.
Oh gosh, yes,
that's
completely
good.
Agree.
Wow,
Completely
that's so good.
So my point, and I've brought this up every time someone's like, "Wow, what you do is so difficult. What you do is hard." I try to bring it up, and I say, "That drywall you just hung, I can't skim that. I couldn't do that." Or, you're building a cabinet, or
no, it really is like a craft. I completely agree.
Wow, that's so good.
And I like to help people program. I like to help people learn to program, but I don't approach it from, I'm going to turn you into a software engineer. I always approach it from, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
I'm not a handy person. I try to be a handy person. I wish I was a handy person.
Yeah.
But instead, I cut my hands with chainsaws and I make lots of mistakes. But the difference is I try to move forward with it. And software is a lot like woodworking or anything else, that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the tools. You don't need to know it all. You just need to know what you want to build, and you need to know how you can take what you want to build and break it into steps. Imagine whatever you're doing is like a set of IKEA instructions. You got pictures, and you're going from point A to point B. Break it into those steps. And I find that a lot of people that do the work are a lot better at breaking up those steps than programmers are.
That's so good.
Yeah, especially in their process. That's the biggest key, is that, you mentioned it, you alluded to it earlier, like a lot of people working with software, they want to try to tailor their workflow to the software, but we're saying, no, we want you to do the opposite. We want to tailor the software to the workflow that you want to have. So, man, I think that, gosh, such a great point.
Wow. Yeah, no, that really kind of blew my mind right there, because it's so true. And Ken, we've talked a little bit even about that before. I don't know if we've ever done it on air, but you and I talk all the time about how especially if you're a newer developer, but even if you're not new, sometimes you get to a point where you're kind of stuck. And really the solution is to stop looking at the whole thing and just look at, like, what is just the next step, right? Like, let me just take one step. Let me not worry about all these errors and all these other, like, what do I need right now, right? And you just start taking small steps, you start breaking it apart, and then all of a sudden, you become unblocked, and so that's such when you were talking about that, I just, I really love everything you were saying, because, I think all of us as software engineers can really identify with that. And I think if you're on the business side, that's going to make a lot of sense to you, right?
Yeah. And I like to draw analogs for people.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what we do is we're building a building. We have an architect, someone who has laid the ground plans, but if you're a blue collar worker and you've ever built something from a blueprint, that, architects are smart guys, but they don't know it all. They don't do the work.
Right.
They don't always have the answers. You get down there, you've got your programmers or your drywall folks or your, each person does a job. People look at this industry, they look at IT, say, you're a software engineer. Obviously, you can fix a printer, stand up my network, you can go and set Kubernetes, you can install my firewall. But it's exactly like any other industry. Some of us are electricians. Some of us are drywall folks. Some of us are architects, and we see the big picture and how things go together. But if you asked us to develop a pathfinding algorithm, we might be able to say A star, the extras, but that's it. We're not going to be able to write it for you off the top of our heads. Where, other people will go into an Amazon interview and they'll say, hey, we need you to write this pathfinding algorithm to go from point A to point B, figure all the nodes and count how many steps between them. And they can do that in 15 minutes. I can't do that in 15. Well, give me ChatGPT and I can do that in 15 minutes. It's just, this whole industry, we've created an analog of, we're super, smart and intelligent, and we've done this, but now you find that companies like Google and Facebook, half their engineers aren't being hired with degrees because, what is a lot more important than what the piece of paper says, what you've worked with, who you've worked with, and the technologies that you've worked on. We're not expecting the folks that are putting up drywall in our house to know, the load weight of the beams that they're putting that drywall to.
That's right.
We expect there to be certain subsets of knowledge and certain silos of knowledge. But at the same time, as a home owner, as a business owner, somewhat what the final vision should be. You know how to identify where some of those weaknesses are.
Yeah.
But you, as the person living in it and having to live with that house for the next 30 years, want to know where the bodies are buried. You don't want to leave your builders, you don't want to leave your general contractors to just squirrel away for 6 months and build your house, because you're going to move in and find out that they ran all the pipes to the ceiling and didn't insulate anything, and the first freeze, it's going to be raining on you.
Yeah.
And so, as a company, you've got to take and understand that IT is very varied, but you need to take an active interest in it. You want to make sure, unlike me, who's currently cutting holes in my drywall, you don't want to find out that, hey, this was put up in 1975 and it all has asbestos in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to have those calls with your team. You want to be in the weeds. Don't treat your IT team as a black box.
Oh, soundbite that.
Right.
No, you had alluded to something that we had talked about last week, and I kind of want to get your take on it. And that is, you had mentioned that all of these big tech layoffs, a lot of these engineers aren't getting rehired. And what Matt and I talked about is that the number one skill for a dev isn't how many frameworks you know or whatever. The number one skill for a developer or an engineer is how good are you at learning? How good are you at figuring things out? What's your take on that?
I'm going to say that I think another one of our big issues is we treat, soft skills as not a priority.
Yeah.
How many times have you guys gone out and had, lunch with a recruiter or talked to them and they're like, wow, you're personable. You're not like other developers. I mean, we're sitting here at the podcast.
Right.
So, but I mean, the thing is a lot of the folks in this industry, again, we treat it as something that it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I consider myself a blue collar builder that just uses a keyboard instead of a nail gun.
Yeah.
I'm out there. I'm talking to the same folks. I'm out there with the people that are actually doing the work and trying to understand what they do, because that's the way you're going to actually write good software for them. We do nothing but hurt ourselves by isolating ourselves. And I mean, I say it time and time again, if you guys aren't going to hire a business consultant, because every company that has software engineers should have a business consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you don't have a business consultant, then at the very least foster the culture of openness, foster that culture of curiosity. Don't just do something because it's the way you've done it for 5, 10, 20 years. I mean, half the time I walk in there, I'm like, why am I'm lazy. I'm going to be honest, I'm about the laziest guy you're ever going to meet. But it's great because every time I go somewhere new, I'm like, how can I do all of this work as best as I can, because I want to do the best work I can.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have to work as hard as I
That's
necessarily
right.
need
With
to.
the least amount of effort.
Right.
And so, I mean, my whole job now is automating everything I can. And it's constantly moving forward as fast as I can. If I get stuck, it's, identifying how I can unstick myself and get someone else in front of it. It's just, I like to keep moving. I have ADHD. If I'm stuck for too long, it's a problem.
Yeah.
And then nothing's going to get done. And so it's just a very much this I need other people helping me to be as effective as I can be. And I think so many folks expect us to be rock stars, and we're absolutely rock stars. I mean, we tie the business together, but the people that laid the foundation to my house are rock stars. The
Right.
people that, put the wiring in my walls and my house has been standing for 40 years are the rock stars. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody there is a part of a team. And we all, we hear this, you may be a 10x developer providing 10 times the value that you have in there. That's cool, but without the business, you're still a 0x developer.
That's right.
Right.
Oh gosh, that is so good.
And I love what you're saying because, this is something else that we've kind of alluded to. And I'd love your take on this, but I really, Ken and I have talked a little bit about just the difference as a developer. Mm-hmm. You can know all these different things, right? You can be a .NET React, Angular, Kubernetes, Docker. I've got my AWS certification. I mean, you can just go on and on and learn a little bit about everything. And some guys, some people are that works for them. I personally even as a developer, I already know that I really understand for the most part, JavaScript. And if I can just double down on just JavaScript and Node and that, that's where I live. That's what makes sense. And so I can spend a lot of time, being kind of good at a lot of things. But if I know I can be really good at this one thing, drywall. Right. That's okay. That's okay for me, And then, there's super programmers like Kenn who can read documentation and figure a lot of more things out, have a little bit more of a diverse skill set. And that's great too. Right. But it's kind of just knowing that, to take that analogy of a blue collar worker, I love that because I also think that for a lot of people in tech, people that I've talked to, other developers, there seems to be kind of an insecurity of I feel like I need to know a lot, when it's actually, if you don't, it's okay to just know this one thing, and to kind of double down on that. If that's the thing that you're going to be good at, that you're passionate about, that's going to make sense to you. I mean, what do you think?
So let me kind of trade that. Do you know many doctors or engineers or lawyers, anyone in any of those industries?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
Yeah,
so
of course.
So my wife, she works as an investigator for the public defender's office, and
that's cool.
Yeah. So a lot of our friends are lawyers, and then prior to that, I worked in healthcare, so a lot of our friends were doctors. You can ask them the same question: why are you, you could go specialize in cardiology or paralysis or muscular systems. But why are you a general practitioner? Does that hurt you to be a general practitioner? Does it help you to primarily focus on copyright law?
Right.
I mean, we have to draw these analogs because to so many folks, this industry is a black box.
Yeah.
But what you should do when picking your specialty is, what do you like to do?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, every one of those doctors, whether they're a general practitioner, or cardiologist, or any of those, they all went to medical school.
Right.
They all have a base level of proficiency, but they had different, inclinations that led them somewhere.
Right.
Me personally, I tend to just go and see what people are looking for, and I like to learn those things. Not necessarily because, it makes me hireable, but I just, whatever, I kind of, it's FOMO. What is everyone else doing?
Yeah.
Am I going to miss the curve? And I typically kind of just see what's going on. And do I like it? I mean, I don't like React. I'll be honest. I'm a much bigger fan of much more bloated boilerplatey languages because I know when I leave them, I can create something rigid and junior developers, anyone else can pick them up and have a pretty rigid system to follow. Where something like React is a top-down type of architecture that requires a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
I can think that way. I don't like to think that way. But should that stop you from learning React? Probably not.
Right.
That may mean it's not going to be your first choice. That may also mean that you're going to pass up a role that if React is their primary stack, you may choose an Angular one instead.
Yeah. So I want to pivot because you have a lot of really good experience at different sizes of companies. And I kind of wanted to get your take on, when we worked together, you were working for kind of a smaller firm, I would say. And now you're working for a really big boy. And, what I wanted to ask first was, what is maybe some things that the smaller companies could learn from what the big guys are doing? And what are some of the things that the big guys could learn from what the smaller guys are doing well and kind of the differences between them?
So I actually want to start with one of the similarities first.
Sure.
And you see this a lot at smaller companies, but you're starting to see it a lot more at bigger companies. And that is the prevalence of full stack developers, not necessarily in the old term of full stack developer, but a developer that really, if you're at a mom and pop shop, you may need to be a networking expert. You also may need to be an infrastructure expert. You may also need to be a software engineer. And at smaller companies, we say, well, that's just because they don't have the budget to hire a DBA and the budget to get these. But at the same time, the larger corporations are moving that same direction. You're moving to Kubernetes and Docker, where you're needing to learn, more information about networking, more information about the infrastructure that your stuff is running on top of. And so I think that what we're going to really start to find out is that these bigger and smaller companies probably are going to start following much more similar approaches. I mean, having worked at very, very small companies and very large companies, their needs are not that much different. The difference between them is, the size of their wallets and, how quickly they can move and their overall, risk tolerance. So a very large corporation, you might have 3 years of meetings before the first line of code is ever written.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that developer is still expected to know the consequences of everything they're writing. After 3 years, you're expected to know how much load that's going to put on the system, where it's going to run, what it needs to run, what size database, what type of database. That's not that much different than a small company. The difference is what level of support you've got from the rest of the organization to kind of support you, and what contingencies do you have to make you successful in those roles. And so I think the difference between working at a small company is just often you have a little more risk tolerance. They're more happy to let you kind of accidentally drop the production database. But at the same time, they may be less inclined to let you use some of the newer software that's going to allow you to effectively do your job.
Yeah.
And so I think going forward, what this notion is that developers really, they need to specialize. They need to have an area that makes them feel happy. But at the same time, they need to be a jack of all trades. They need to be familiar with at least, cloud infrastructure or serverless, and not necessarily that you're even going to run on serverless, but just know the ins and outs of your architectural decisions. And I think that's true across every size organization.
That's good. No, that's so good, man. I feel like I can ask like 20 more questions because all of these have been great.
The best ones.
We're coming up to our time limit here, and so the last thing I wanted to ask you is, you kind of mentioned it in your previous and reply, and when you were just talking about how technologically you don't like to have that FOMO, for we have a lot of developers, a lot of tech people who listen in, and so I just wanted to ask you, man, what has you excited that's coming up in tech right now? What has you excited? What do you think is coming up that's really cool? And I'm gonna take AI off the table because that one's a little too easy. But what has you excited, man?
Honestly, generative AI, if we're taking that off the table, then it's going to be hard to really... I think we're going to be seeing a lot of stuff there. I think generative AI is overhyped in a lot of ways. I think a lot of
Explain that, because that's a little bit of a zag from what you're going to hear, I think.
Generative AI is basically there in the name. It's what you feed in is what you're going to get out of it.
Yes,
it's looking at patterns. It's looking at, things grouped together. It produces, that. It's a lot of folks are going to say, AI is stupid. It's only capable of producing what you've put into it. Well, I'm kind of stupid. As a developer,
we are too.
I got my start on everything. Everything I've ever done has been by taking something else apart. I was never the guy to go read 6 books worth of documentation and start building from the ground up from those books. I was the guy to go pull apart someone else's software and say, how did they save a file? How did they do this? How are they... If I want to figure out how to do something, I figure out if someone else has done something similar, and I figure out their approach.
Yeah.
I don't find generative AI, to be any different than that.
Yeah.
And people will be like, they're not actually thinking. And I'm like, well, half the time I'm not actually thinking. I'm producing. Someone gives me some input. My brain finds some patterns from that input, and I produce an output. And I think that taking away that menial part of my day is going to be the biggest improvement going forward.
Yeah.
So much of my code that I write, so much of the stuff that I'm doing is me looking through code saying, wow, this is really messy. How can I refactor this? Or me going through there saying, wow, 20 minutes staring at a class saying, what is this class actually doing?
Mm-hmm.
What are the side effects of this? Or what is this SQL statement actually doing? And I can read an execution plan, but the thing is humans are okay at recognizing patterns. Computers are much better.
Yeah.
That's great.
And
much more bigger and much more complicated patterns.
Yeah.
That is, when you had said that about it's overhyped, that's immediately what I was thinking, because they want to make AI seem like, this is general AI intelligence that, we're going to have Skynet or whatever. But we are so far from that, it's not even funny. But what we do have is these very sophisticated pattern recognition algorithms that are using different forms of statistics and that can do exactly what you say, which is exactly what a developer does in their day-to-day. They say, I think the best developers anyway say, here's this problem. What other people have done to solve similar problems, how can I apply that to my problem? And that's exactly what a generative AI does.
And so that if we loop back to the very beginning of this podcast, we talked about basically how we arise to some of these conclusions, how we find them, how we think about things. And I find that, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is just, why do we stick with JavaScript? Because we use it. Why do we stick with C#? We're familiar with it.
Yeah.
And we're able to think about it in that way. But we're not necessarily thinking about it. And I want to stress that when we're producing C# code or JavaScript code, we're not often thinking. We have recognized those patterns, and they're just kind of flowing from our fingertips without our brain doing any work whatsoever. And I don't think generative AI is any different in a lot of capacities. I have associations in my mind. An old nickname of mine was like Wikipedia, because I remember little keywords and my brain works like a graph. I remember a keyword from here to here to here to here, and I can get from point A to point B without knowing any of the actual substance from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But I just remember the little keywords to get me there. And I find that generative AI is in a very similar vein.
Mm-hmm.
I am writing code. I know what I want that code to do, but I can't immediately think of the code to produce it. I don't know if that's going to be, does C# have a string.left? Does it have a string.right? Does it just need to do a substring? I don't know the intricacies, but I do know that I want the 3 characters after this occurs here in the string. So I say, hey, ChatGPT, in Haskell, here's what I want you to write. And it produces it because it's a simple pattern.
Yeah. No, and one thing to kind of cap off the AI discussion is I think you're exactly right about all of that. And what the AI can't do is the AI can't recognize value. Yeah. Like we as people, that is why I don't ever fear being replaced, because it's all about being able to ask the AI the right questions. Just like you were saying earlier, you have to be able to get the business to ask the right questions to the developer. Well, the developer has to be able to ask the right questions to the generative AI to get the result that they want, right? But all of that flows, it starts from the business valuing something, a product, a customer relationship, whatever that may be, and then everything flows off of that, and AI is never going to be able to do that. That's a human thing. Yep. And so, no, I just, anyway.
Well, folks, I tried to take AI off the table for the question. I did not do it successfully, but it's still a very, very good answer. And yeah, JD, would really love talking with you. Sure. Such great analogies, man. We really appreciate having you here today. JD, do you have for anybody who just kind of was listening, is there a way that they can find you? Do you have a website, LinkedIn, anything where they can just kind of explore a little bit more about what you do?
You can always look me up on GitHub. My
Perfect.
GitHub name is Jarrett Davis, so JerrettDavis. You can find me there. It links to my Twitter and stuff. For the most part,
Perfect.
I work on stuff that interests me. So I tend to find myself to be much more of a tech evangelist. I can do the work, but I like to make people excited about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, that's great.
And I like to see what they can produce. So
That's so good, man. That's so good. Yeah, definitely go and check him out. I feel like you're going to be a really good GitHub follow. I feel like the range of repositories you have started is going to be quite large.
Oh,
so.
and he's an open source contributor too. So
there we go. Yes. Oh my.
No, he's the whole package. It's really amazing. Thank you so much, JD, for joining us today. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys. We will see you guys here in the next couple weeks.